When you board a city bus, the sequence is almost always the same. The door opens at the front. The driver is there, close to the entrance. The floor is flat or nearly flat, and the step up from the pavement is low enough that most people barely notice it. You tap your card, find a seat, and the bus moves. The engine is somewhere behind you. You probably do not know exactly where, and during the journey you are unlikely to look for it. It is not visible from inside and does not intrude on the experience of being a passenger. That invisibility is not an accident. It is the result of a specific engineering decision made in the middle of the last century, and the consequences of that decision are present in almost every detail of how a modern city bus works. Let's get into it right here on Small Things. What rear engine actually means. When bus engineers say rear engine, they mean the entire powertrain, including the engine, transmission, cooling radiator, and exhaust system, is concentrated as a single package at the rear of the vehicle. The drivetrain does not run through the length of the bus. It ends at the back. At the rear of most city buses is a large access panel or a series of hinged covers that give mechanics direct access to the engine from outside the vehicle. The engine can be lifted out as a complete unit through these panels without dismantling the bus interior. The powertrain is self-contained, accessible from outside, and entirely separate from the passenger and driver spaces. How buses got here. The earliest motor buses were built on the same principles as trucks because the manufacturers were often the same companies and the technology transferred directly. The engine sat at the front under a bonnet, driving the rear wheels through a long drive shaft. The driver sat above and behind the engine, looking over a substantial hood. The entrance door was at the front, beside the driver, accessed by climbing several steps up from the road. This arrangement worked. It was mechanically straightforward, easy to maintain, and familiar to anyone who had worked with commercial vehicles. But it created specific problems for a vehicle whose entire purpose was to carry large numbers of people on and off at frequent stops. The high front step slowed boarding. The hood limited what the driver could see on the near side front of the vehicle. The engine noise and heat sat directly beside the driver and near the front passengers. Engineers explored underfloor engines through the 1950s and into the 1960s as a way to solve the floor height problem without moving the engine entirely to the rear. The engine was laid on its side under the passenger floor, between the front and rear axles, in a compartment below the seating. This lowered the floor considerably and removed the hood from the driver's view, but it created serious maintenance problems. The engine was accessible only by lifting floor panels from inside the vehicle or from a pit beneath the bus in the depot, both slow and inconvenient. Removing the engine for major work required substantial disassembly of the vehicle's interior. The rear engine layout solved both problems at once. It moved the engine out of the underfloor cavity, restoring maintenance access through rear panels. It kept the floor level because no drivetrain needed to pass through the passenger space, and it concentrated all the powertrain weight and heat at one end of the vehicle, away from both the driver and the majority of passengers. In Britain, manufacturers including Bristol and later British Leyland developed rear-engine single-deck and double-deck buses through the late 1950s and 1960s. The Bristol RE and the Leyland National became standard on British city routes. In the United States, transit manufacturers followed through the 1970s, and by the 1980s, the rear-engine layout had become the industry standard for urban transit buses in most countries. It has remained so, and the layout is so thoroughly embedded that alternatives are rarely seriously considered for new designs. the weight problem nobody sees. Of all the engineering consequences of moving the engine to the rear, the least visible to passengers is the one that matters most for the bus's handling: weight distribution. A city bus is almost never evenly loaded. Passengers board at the front door and tend to fill the vehicle forward to back, meaning the heaviest human load is usually concentrated in the front third and middle of the bus. On a front-engine bus, this creates a compound problem. The heaviest mechanical component, the engine, and the heaviest passenger cluster are simultaneously concentrated at the same end of the vehicle. The front axle carries a disproportionate share of the total load, which reduces the effective steering response and increases tire wear on the front wheels under heavy loading conditions. The rear engine resolves this by acting as a permanent ballast at the opposite end of the vehicle from where passengers cluster. As more passengers board and move forward, the rear engine's fixed weight pulls in the opposite direction, keeping the load distribution across both axles within manageable limits. The engine is not just a power source placed at the back for convenience. Its weight is doing structural work throughout the journey, counterbalancing a load that shifts constantly as people board and exit at each stop. The effect is most pronounced on high-frequency urban routes, where the bus fills and empties dozens of times per hour. A bus completing a route through a city center may cycle through full and empty states 50 or 60 times in a single shift. Each time the bus fills with standing passengers at a busy stop, the rear engine prevents the weight from tipping the vehicle's balance too far forward. Each time passengers exit and the front empties, the rear engine provides a stable reference point for the suspension geometry. Engineers specifying a new urban bus treat the engine location partly as a mass distribution calculation. The weight of the engine at the rear, combined with the expected passenger load distribution across different times of day, determines where the loaded center of gravity sits and how the axles share the vehicle weight. The back row gets the worst of it. If the goal of putting the engine at the rear were to keep passengers away from the noise, the arrangement would not make much sense. The passengers closest to the engine are the ones at the very back, and those rear seats are the last to fill on any busy bus, partly because of the noise, partly because of the warmth, and partly because of the vibration that comes through the floor above the engine compartment. The engine did not go to the rear to protect passengers from noise. The decision was made because of driver sightlines, weight distribution, maintenance access, and floor height. The fact that engine noise falls on the back row passengers is a consequence of where the engineering led, not a deliberate choice about who should hear it. This is why the rear of a city bus is genuinely different from the front in ways that passengers learn through experience. The back row is warmer. Vibration comes through the seat. In cold weather, the rear warms up first. None of this was designed. It is the sensory footprint of a large combustion engine placed at the back for reasons that had nothing to do with the people sitting above it. The engineers traded acoustic comfort for the back rows in exchange for a flat floor, clear sightlines, and easy maintenance access for the whole bus. The back row passengers are the price of the design, and most of them do not know what they are paying for. 4 moments the placement makes possible. Someone boarding with a pushchair steps directly from the pavement onto the bus floor, folds the pushchair inside the door, and the bus moves again within seconds. That stop takes 18 seconds. Multiplied across 100 stops in an operating day, boarding speed of that kind is a significant factor in how much of a city a route can cover per hour with the same number of vehicles. Transit planners who specify low-floor buses are partly specifying faster stops, even if the published reason is accessibility. A regular on the back row of a particular route knows before sitting down what they are choosing: warmer in winter, louder at speed, with a different vibration through the seat than the middle of the bus. They have learned the rear engine through years of riding without ever seeing it or consciously looking for it. A mechanic at a depot swings open the rear engine panel, connects the lift equipment, and removes the engine unit in a few hours. The replacement goes in. The bus is back in service that afternoon. An underfloor engine in the same vehicle would require considerably more disassembly, and the same turnaround would not be possible. An articulated bus swings through a tight S-bend at a transit terminal. The pivot joint sits between the axles of the two sections. The engine at the very back provides ballast behind the rear axles, keeping the rear section stable through the geometry of the curve. The engine you never think about. The engineering problem city bus designers solved over several decades was not just where to put the engine, it was how to make the engine irrelevant to the experience of being a passenger. The rear engine placement was designed to move everything mechanical, everything hot, everything loud, and everything requiring maintenance away from the two things that matter most on a transit vehicle: the people getting on and off, and the driver helping them do it safely. A passenger who boards a city bus in the morning, rides for 20 minutes, and exits again without once thinking about the engine has experienced the design working exactly as intended. The best engineering solutions are the ones that make themselves invisible. On a city bus, the engine at the back does exactly that. If this changed the way you look at the next city bus you board, let us know in the comments what you want us to explore next. We might make it our next episode. Thanks for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.